Alrighty, hello every folks! Do you all like lists? Because I love lists. And I decided to start making a list of just various things that OneVision does that are kind of unique compared with the official versions, because, frankly, a friend a few weeks ago had said, hey, can you just make a, list of unique features that might help to decide which version I want to go play? And, yeah, in most cases I would recommend folks to start with Reborn because of, support the official series, but also, hot damn, OneVision is, as far as I'm concerned, the finest strategic experience that you can shove in your pants, and yes, that can be taken entirely out of context and still be true. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and get started on this whole thing. So it's gonna be a little bit over 100 here. I'm gonna combine a couple of things here and there just because they happen to be relevant, and let's go ahead and get started. I'm actually gonna start reading the list backwards because sure, why the hell not? So first of all, speed casts. Now this is not technically a direct ability in and of itself, but MP costs for basic abilities, like for example, like the basic missile spells, basic heals, stuff like that, they're sort of better tiered out in this particular version. Just in general, all of the tiers work their own unique way in OneVision. But this more or less means if you have, let's say, an Earthcaster, or if you have a healer or something like that, their basic ability, unless otherwise acted upon, will always be available to them. So this means, for example, a unit running MP Suppression Clause would be able to very effectively shut somebody down, but it also means that even a tired unit would still be able to at least do something instead of sitting and waiting for their next turn to come. Alright, next up on the list, we've got throwable shields. Now, this is a weird place to start, but also, I've seen multiple people that mentioned that they tried OneVision exclusively because they heard you could use a Necromancer in Chapter 1, so if I were to tell you you can add Captain America shields to your soldiers, I'm pretty sure that's at least got to throw something on the scale. Second of all, dual shields. You can craft a shield that allows you to essentially have a shield that's classified as a fist weapon, allowing you to dual-wield shields like it's Dark Souls. Third, Weather Shamans. The Shamans actually come in two different flavors. You've got the Geomancers and you've got the Shamans. The Geomancers control the Earth, the Shamans control the weather. And those Geomancers work just like they did in Final Fantasy Tactics with a bunch of improvements, including things like being able to encase themselves in rock armor, being able to run and walk on lava, as well as being able to rupture the Earth, blowing away any obstacles in your path, as well as opening them up for your damaging geomancy spells and such. On top of this, you have the Shamans who are able to affect the weather. Now, if y'all loved all those kinds of things over in Triangle Strategy, this thing did it years earlier, with, for example, the Shamans being able to call down a thunderstorm, worsening the weather for the rest of the fight, and additionally having a decent chance to stun most things in the area, give or take. Now, I say in the area, give or take, because it's a mostly map-wide clearing type of move, but not, like, completely the whole map, so it's kind of just like a cloud appears above the character and just starts zapping stuff at random. So there's a 25% chance to stun everything if you're calling down a storm, or if you're clearing down the weather, there's a 25% chance to weaken and breach everything in that area as well, which is just a ton of fun. Now this is a locked-in percentage and can't be resisted, so that's always neat. Anyway, from there we have offensive shields in general. So there's just, like, an assload of shields in OneVision. From your basic shields, I always get a call, like, the moment I start doing one of these. Anyway, so from your basic shields that are going to be doing your typical knockback kind of stuff, to your heavier shields that are able to have a guaranteed stun on impact and also will grant you steadfast so you physically can't move from how heavy those shields are, to the lighter shields that can be used to jab somebody in the throat, to replacing your shield with a parrying dagger, or replacing your shield with an offhand orb, just like the magic orbs back in the SNES version, including the final version, which will actually lower your weight as a reference to that. In fact, many of the bosses that have been around from the SNES version will carry one of those. So that's just a fun little thing as well, on top of actually having a weaken effect if you were to kind of use it to quickly jab somebody. On top of that, all buffs and debuffs have been reworked since the PSP version, making them either as intense as, or oftentimes more intense than the versions in Reborn, meaning that things like Breach and Fear and the Elemental Averses actually have a very noticeable effect on various aspects of various fights. So that is just a really good feeling to see those things taking place, which is especially the case when, for example, you've got units using stuff like axes, or you've got, let's say, whip units inflicting false strike on somebody, because you gotta have your Indiana Jones references. or cases where, like, let's say you have somebody inflicting a breach and then using a gigantic racial bonus off of a book to then combine into a short bow to then allow you to blow past the defenses of a lizard or something. Like, there's a ton of kind of team building play there. Okay, next, inbuilt lobbers. So many classes will have inbuilt kind of offensive, offensive and defensive abilities in place of their typical, like, punch and throw rock abilities. So instead, for example, let's say you've got lobbers built into the Valkyrie. I believe the Fusilier, if I'm not mistaken. It was either the Fusilier or the Beast Tamer, as well as the Shaman. And so this means they can still use a sword and, or not Shaman, sorry, Warlock. I'm getting real confused today. Anyway, so this means that for your item specialist type of units, they can still use equipment in both of their hands, but they can still passively throw an item. Now, this isn't going to be as good as the lobber item, but it is going to be very darn useful, just kind of in general. It is going to be a very useful tool to have around. Okay, next, we've got, well, actually, hold on, because there's more here as well. So the inbuilt status actions, as I'm listing them on my list. So there's, for example, things like archers and many other lightweight sort of roguish type of units that will be able to counter with things like throwing sand in somebody's face. So, like, even if they get crit backwards, they'll get knocked backwards, they'll pull out some sand and go and throw it in somebody's face for a fall strike. Or let's say many of your casters are able to throw out inbuilt hexes in order to kind of boost their particular performance. So, like, basic wizards, even if their spells aren't available for whatever reason, they are still able to throw out a quick, let's say, rupture at a distance, or a long-range breach, or a weaken. There's a lot of different versions of them, depending on the flavor of the class itself, but they all have some, like, little kind of little pocket ranged action that allows them to throw out those moves. Additionally, due to the fact that this gives them a direct firing inbuilt attack, this allows them to combine it with trajectory, which was not possible in the PSP version, basically giving you the effect of the targeting line that we saw in Reborn, allowing you to see where your spells are going to go. Now, on top of this, it's worth noting that trajectory itself has been reworked to actually be a combination of the old trajectory as well as back attack, meaning that the old ability that was basically useless in Reborn outside of the AI, and additionally was barely ever useful back in the PSP version, has by far its best version here, since due to accuracy being reworked, it's going to give you a sort of universal cheap accuracy boost for everything, from finishers to spells to ranged attacks to melee attacks. It will always end up being useful, meaning that it's never going to feel like a wasted slot. Alright, next we've got the Skirmisher AI. Now, this is something that the original PSP version tried to do. It's something that we occasionally see forced in Reborn. But when it comes to spawns, the AI technically has the means to use what I like to call the Skirmisher build. This is a combination of melee and ranged attacks. The thing is, oftentimes in the official versions, they would refuse to do it. In fact, there's almost no times when they actually will. One of the rare instances that the kind of a skirmisher spawn actually worked properly was over in was it just like within a particular level bracket in the PSP version in San Bronza, where there was one archer that could potentially spawn with both a dagger and a crossbow, but outside of that, it was only scripted moments when those particular things would actually end up working properly, since most of the time they would just prefer a heavier two-handed weapon. Okay. Next up, we have just improved AI in general. And what's funny is that the AI actually has not functionally improved in any way, but my god, it certainly feels that way whenever you're going and playing this thing. Because the AI will make smarter decisions across the board and will generally be more effective in all the things that it does. And the reason for this is just the way that it's been, well, built. So a lot of things have been combined with other effects, meaning that, let's say there was a particular debuff that the AI really, really loved spamming for whatever reason. Like, let's say Lodestone back in the PSP version. Like, oh man, you're hitting Fall Strike on my units that aren't affected by it? Thank you! Thank you for completely wasting your turn. And so in this particular case, they would end up going and combining it with something else in order to make it so that the AI will properly use that ability when they should be using it. So this means that the AI oftentimes feels a lot smarter, even though technically it's the same AI. It just has better tools available to it. Alright, next, we've got guaranteed drops. So if a unit will have a guaranteed drop of any, or sorry, will have a unique drop of any kind, it will always drop. And more often than not, those particular units will be carrying Steadfast so that their drops cannot be lost. So that's always good as well. Additionally, I'll be covering more on this in later sections of this list, but when it comes to those guaranteed drops, they oftentimes, like if it's a weapon or something that they can physically equip, they will be using it. So, for example, if you run into a unit that's carrying the procs or something like that, instead of being, random friggin' hoplite in the middle of Palace of the Dead, and maybe they have a chance to drop it, instead it's like, no, it's that, like, gold-colored, shiny asshole over there with way higher stats and a weapon that he physically should not be able to equip, that came force-equipped with that weapon and is basically going to be your new mini-boss for today. So that stuff is really darn fun. It gives you sort of generic mini-bosses, and it's so cool. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on then. Siege bows. I frickin' love them. So siege bows and just kind of bow categories in general have been expanded so that all of these different weapon types have a lot of different roles. And siege bows in particular are basically a bow that can allow for better vertical firing trajectories, but cannot fire beyond range. So basically really good for firing up on top of buildings and walls and such, not so good at firing down from them. So that's a really just fun category to play around with. You've also got short bows that are going to continuously keep getting upgrades into the post-game, as well as just a lot of cool in-betweens for your various types of bow flavors. On top of that, I don't believe I actually have it on this particular list, but your archers are able to use weapon poisons, which is pretty cool. So they can make, stunning longbows and stuff like that. Okie dokie, next up, more field interactions. So I mentioned one of these earlier with the Shamans, that they're able to, let's say, rupture past an entire crowd of bushes and trees to split the ground open to make you a clear path through the Thrompa Wildwood or something. You've got cases of Squash, an ability that was so oddly specific, nobody in their right mind ever used it before, whose entire purpose was to break particular types of props. And now instead, it's a sort of like kick move, more or less, that's given to soldiers. And just kind of like basic grunt swords, where they are able to use it to instantly break past, a bush or a boulder or something like that, but at the same time, they're also able to use it to stagger an opponent in front of them to get an easier hit off. Okay. Next up, flying dragons. Dragons can temporarily give themselves the ability to fly, because everyone deserves a chance to fly, dang it! But this also means that the AI dragons that oftentimes would be a bit of a pain in the neck because they spawned at the bottom of a cliff or something, will oftentimes fly up to you and have a more awesome fight, and it's just generally way frickin' cooler across the board. Except for Hydras. Hydras can't fly because they don't have wings, but they do get berserk because they're attacking with all their heads. Again, everything is just made with love. Carrying right along here. Next, guaranteed finishers. So finishers, whenever they're used, as you saw right there, totally unintentional, love that timing, they're going to always inflict whatever they say they're going to inflict. Now, all of those finishers have also been reworked, so they have entirely different purposes. So, like, let's say the old Wind Scythe ability over on your spears, instead of just being the spear move with slightly better vertical tolerance, that's just just sort of there. It's actually a TP leeching move, meaning that it's going to be a situation where it's a finisher that you specifically want to use to finish off something with high TP, and then basically build yourself up for the following turn. So, like, if something has a bunch of TP, you'll drain all of it and recover half of it, which means that, again, it can be used to tag into other skills. So this gives it some very interesting potential. And there's a lot of reworks like this, like just going down the list in general. Let's take a look at what we've got. So, like, let's say on katanas here, we got like a 3-range guaranteed sleep laser, more or less. On archers, we have a leaden and recovery time delay. That RT delay was added after Reborn promised an RT delay, and it's unclear whether it actually does. So in this case, we have a moment of when Vision does what Official can't, where the leaden does directly give you a recovery time delay for stun locking stuff. Morpheus will be a guaranteed sleep. Starfall is basically the Sonic Boom ability from Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, where they're going to do an area boom with their bow. Then we've got a guaranteed shackle coming out of Absolute Zero. Over on Sidearms, which are your thrown weapons and blowguns all combined into one, got a guaranteed slow, a TP reset, a essentially a long-range snipe move that's got much longer range than all of your other finishers, as well as Implosion, which has a guaranteed stop, and also will cause a unit to evaporate if they're finished off with this. You've got Heartbreaker, which is on daggers. It's going to drain MP, Mesmerize for a guaranteed charm, a Twin Fang that's just like a double hit. Got an HP drain and weaken over on books. Don't have much more on them yet. You know, damage plus shackle on Crystallize here, or a double hit plus stun on their Arrhythmia. On spears, you got Ruination, which is going to be a silence plus rupture. A Wind Scythe, which is going to do that TP draining thing I just mentioned, or a long range kind of a sweeping circle from Giga Tempest, as you'd expect. I love whips in this one too. You've got Tidal Bore, that's going to be a long-range poison laser. You've got Constrictor, which is going to shackle something by breaking its arms. Flagellation, that's a double hit. And Armageddon, which is an incredibly high-scaling damage, kind of just like direct damage move there in an AoE around you. With swords, you got Sonic Blade for damage plus stun, you got Thunder Beast for breaking something's arms, Cooper Belt for a recovery time reset, slowing down areas in an area around you, basically serving as that one finisher that Cloud gets in FFT, Grand Cross, that's going to be just kind of a long-range nuke, as it were. You've got, again, just like every weapon category has more and more and more, and I don't believe I actually included the sub-finishers in this particular one, but there's certain characters that will also have these kind of sub-finisher moves, which are just unique finishers that certain classes get. So like Necromancers get the Ahriman shot, which is just going to use ghosts to guarantee your crossbow bolt and curse the thing that it hits. Additionally, you've got, like, let's say Hobram with his Blade Knight class, a Soul Strike, which just converts your MP into additional physical damage. Discord, which is basically like a samurai move from Final Fantasy Tactics, where it's going to damage enemies and heal your own dudes, on top of his usual stuff. So like Mistfinder, replacing your first move here, going to be a double hit. Then you've got an area air move, Phantom, which is going to scare stuff nearby, or Sunblossom, which is going to be sort of like an accuracy snipe move. I forget what Sunblossom does differently, but I guess it's also an explosion. I forget. I don't use that. Like, usually in his case, I'm just going to go for Discord because it's just that dang good. Anyways, this goes on and on. Like, everybody's got new stuff, and it's amazing. And a lot of them are just completely unique to this version. So stuff like Quill Rain is like a 10-tile, just like complete burst through an entire area, just firing in a straight line, just like rapid firing down an entire area. And if you've got a lot of enemies lined up that are potentially lower on health, just having this machine gun shot over here will absolutely annihilate them. Anyways, let's continue on here. So, Sidearms, we partially got into that already, but Sidearms are going to be a combination of throwing weapons on top of blowguns. Now, why would they be combined? Why were they removed and reborn? Because throwing weapons were the absolute definition of just a vacuous level of absolute suck in the PSP version. It's such a cool idea that they did nothing fun with. Okay. Thrown weapons in PSP were basically a just ranged attack type weapon, giving you like longbow style damage, which again seems weird to the reborn people. Basically, you've got high potential damage on a weapon that you can use in one hand. Okay, all well and good, except for the fact that you had to specifically make or buy a new one, because every time you used it, it was consumed, which meant that you had to keep a stack of those weapons around, which meant that they were, I mean, sure, expensive, that's one annoyance, but also extremely time-consuming to actually make any use of. To the point that shots just basically replaced the entire thrown category in Reborn. They were just that unsalvageably bad as far as the official release was concerned. And frankly, they weren't wrong. Now, as far as the thrown weapons in this one, they serve a very different role, where they are still going to be heavy weapons in one hand, but also, since you're carrying a stack of them, they are going to be extremely heavy in weight, meaning that they're basically a ranged attack to use on tank-type units. So like one character I have on my team here is always running around with heavy armor and javelins, as well as an item that allows him to fly, which allows him to perch up high above and throw down javelins while being functionally immune to the plinky ranged attacks that can reach him. Okay, anyways, let's go ahead and continue on. Sidearms, long story short, the thrown category didn't used to have finishers associated with it. That's why it was combined with Sidearms, or combined into Sidearms, because the blowguns did, even though nobody really used them for that. So anyways, there's that. So we got the race reworks next, where every race type was reworked, not only to be more available earlier on as you'd kind of hope. Like, honestly, the fact that you could only get gremlins and orcs in basically the end of the game was just an utter travesty before. I don't know why Reborn didn't fix that particular thing, because honestly, Umbra Pact or like Demons Pact over on your Terenites, why not? Like, what are gremlins and orcs bringing to the table that that justifies them being locked away with, lock and key? Like, what exactly did they do to deserve that punishment? So yeah, you get access to those way earlier. Like that first gremlin that you run into in Chapter 2, you can recruit that guy. In fact, there's actually a gremlin in Faramba Wildwoods that can be your first Fusilier. He is just happily floating along with a revolver in his hand. What a happy little goober. Anyway, so that's the race reworks. Next, utility spells. There's a lot of them. Every element, rather than having them just for the purpose of flavor, like they did in the PSP version, or removing them like they did in Reborn, what we've got on the utility spells is stuff that will make sense for each particular element. Stuff like ice being able to give you the ability to walk on water because you're freezing it. Stuff like fire being able to guarantee critical hits. Stuff like lightning being able to charge TP. Stuff like water being able to properly heal you. And this is coming from somebody that genuinely ran Quench on my favorite wizard going through the PSP version. It still was super unreliable. So yeah, you can actually use Quench as a proper heal this time. The move where you go and cover somebody in mud, instead of just giving you hobble, fully destroys somebody's speed. It's like slow hobble and recovery time reset, I believe. Like those debuffs, utility spells, all of that kind of stuff, it is very thematically like the kinds of stuff you would expect out of a card game even. Things like, let's say you on the air tree, you can give somebody the ability to fly. You can use essentially a crushing air pressure kind of funnel to go break somebody's legs and take away a percentage of their health and stuff. They're very creative in terms of their implementation, and additionally in terms of other utility abilities, you saw one of them happen just now, where that guy used Shadow Break to blow up a Phalanx in order to hit some dudes. So the old Shadow Break ability is another one of those old moves that previously was basically never used because its only purpose was to break shadows, which didn't come up that often in any of the official versions. They come up all the time in One Vision because not only are shadows twice the range, but also a seventh of the price. But additionally, they're going to be something that can actually be turned against you. So like, let's say the AI is abusing shadows quite a bit. What you can use is bring in a Terranite and have them Shadow Break it, which self-destructs the shadow. The kind of implication is that they're basically like launching their weapon out of all directions out of the thing, because it'll use their weapon damage, it'll cause breach on everything that it hits, and cause a ton of damage on everything that it hits, as if they hit them themselves. So this gives them a huge amount of kind of counter potential versus heavy tank type units, making them one of the better can openers, as you'd kind of hope, from something like the Terranite. Okay. Next up, utility armors. There's a ton of armor categories, and those armor categories, I should probably mention, are going to be consistent from the start of the game to the finish. So if you liked a particular armor type at the very beginning, it will always be there in all tiers, all categories, up until the end of the game, like up until the end of post-game. You will always have your favorite options available. Stuff is added to the pool, it's never taken out. So like one of the big problems the PSP had that Reborn mostly addressed was where, like, let's say you got your like Fall Strike Cutlass or something like that, right? And it's like, great, I have this Fall Strike weapon. It makes stuff more inaccurate when I'm fighting it 1v1, only to then realize, oh shoot, this thing does nothing past about a chapter later. Or you got your Poison Spear, which completely drops off. You got your Breach Spears, and it's like, wow, I can't even do enough damage with a Breach Spear to take advantage of the breach. I'm sure glad I invested in this. So either ways, that kind of stuff was frustrating, to say the least. In Reborn, again, they addressed it to some degree, but what we see in One Vision is that as soon as a new option is added, you will always have it available to you. So there's always going to be another version to then keep continuously using that as the game progresses, and you might get additional kind of sub-variants of whatever that was, Alright, from there we have grenades. Oh, actually, wait, hold on, I'm not done with utility armors. Hold on. Finish the list that you're talking about, idiot. Utility armors, also, so like, let's say you like heavy armor, but you also wanted to modify it to do a bit more damage. Great, you can have magically augmented power armor that trades that vitality for strength. Let's say you wanted to add a grappling hook to your arm gauntlets. Great, you can do that. Let's say you wanted to go lighter weight and higher evasion on, you know, your guy that's in the front lines doing all that sword fighting kind of stuff. Great, replace his shield with a parrying dagger. There's all kinds of utility tools available in your belt. Now, let's get to grenades. So, the shot grenades in the PSP version did not work. In Reborn, they were reworked to instead function off of your weapon skill, which is a cool way to approach it. The way that One Vision handled it was to make them into proper grenades. Now, what this means is that when it comes to the grenade types, you have basically everybody that's able to use them. However, it's going to be kind of different potencies depending on who uses it how. Let's say a standard unit using it will just basically detonate it in their hand, and that's not the smartest idea in all situations, but it can potentially be useful. You've got item specialists, like for example anyone using a lobber, or if you let's say have a warlock, or you happen to have a Valkyrie or something like that that's able to throw it, what you would do instead then is just throw the grenade, and you've got flashbangs, tear gas, as well as, hang on, what's the other one? As well as mustard gas. And so these will essentially explode with a guaranteed amount of damage. I believe it's also based off of your weapon skill, if I recall correctly, and also will have a guaranteed debuff associated with it. So like tear gas grenades will always silence the target, or flashbangs will always stun, and mustard gas will always poison. Additionally, it's worth noting that just like Reborn, both Poison and Envenom were actually merged together to give you just better poison all the time. Also worth noting that this change happened years before Reborn did it. Not to disparage Reborn, I freaking love it, but I'm just saying One Vision did like a lot of this stuff first. Anyway, which, actually, it's also worth noting that not only do those grenades do better in the hands of item specialists, there's one specialist in particular that does it better than anyone else, and that would be Lyndall and his Commando class, who's actually able to properly use the flashbang, tear gas, and mustard bombs, because all of these came from Balbody, or whatever the hell that whole situation is. So yeah, was it Balbody? I always get like Balbody or Balbodians and Balmalkins confused. Yeah, Balbody. There we go. But yeah, so yeah, the Commando here, he's the only one that's able to use those particular abilities, and he basically can use them in an AoE at a very long range. So he's able to just basically grenade launcher those things, and that's pretty awesome. Okay, next up, we've got modeled armor and weight consistency. So I mentioned earlier that you're always going to have access to your favorite options from the start of the game to the finish. I should also mention that, unlike the official versions, there is no weight creep. Now, Reborn definitely dealt with a good bit of that weight creep. It properly handled that weight creep, but for those unfamiliar with the PSP version, basically what it came down to is your equipment just got freakishly heavy as the game progressed, and they're like, hey, guess what? Guess what your options are for dealing with this? That's right, you just deal with it, bitch! Your stuff just got super heavy, and, like, it never came back down, and you couldn't, like, use lower tiers, because, simply put, it just couldn't keep up with the better stuff, so, like, your units just drastically slowed down as you got into the post-game, like, you're just chugging through molasses. So to that end, let's say you've got your Damask armor over here, right? We look at heavy armor in the form of the male hauberk in the early game, weight 12. We look at Balder armor in the sort of mid-game, weight 12. We've got the heavy Lorica showing up a few levels later, weight 12. We've got the Damask armor popping up later, weight 12. Then we can also modify that to trade that vitality for strength, still weight 12. Or we can go down in armor a little bit, but also essentially lose some of those benefits, but also kind of, you know, balance out our defense types, go for more of like a medium thing with this Raider vest, but then we go ahead and go to the other heavy armor over here with the worm scale. You'll notice that this is actually unique. This is technically a little bit lower on the list, but whatever, we'll cover that now, I suppose. Also, weight 12. Point is, when you've got that heavy armor, that misses weight 12. With exception to some of them that are going to be a little bit different, like, you know, Thanatos armor over here is a bit more like caster armor. Anyway, other note here, the worm scale stuff is unique, meaning that for the Know Your Unit episodes, we do not need to cover how you can use worm scale and Dragon Slayer on absolutely everybody in every situation. So, So you've essentially got one piece of armor for every weight type, like whether you wanted the vest variant, the armor variant, whether you wanted the helmet. I think I have one of those. Yeah, the helmet, the sleeve variant, or the shoe variant. I believe the spark guards. The spark guards are the one bit that is not unique. So there's that. So that's all well and neat. What else was I covering here? Oh yeah, modeled out armor. So as far as the armor is concerned, basically all of them are going to be properly modeled out in terms of what you'd expect. So like robes, generally not going to be very good at dealing with getting punctured by stuff. Vests are pretty easy to move around in, probably not so good at getting cut up. Heavy armor, generally pretty good against everything. Not particularly good at resisting debuffs, though, due to low evasion, meaning that heavy units typically are more susceptible to debuffs. Lightweight units tend to resist debuffs very well, but tend not to hold up well versus guaranteed attacks, which there's a decent amount of. Robes tend to completely plink off spells, but tend to suffer versus arrows. And so this sort of gives you a very modeled out feeling where oftentimes you can generally feel the kinds of armor that somebody's running. It's a hard feeling to describe, but let's just take my word for it. You really just feel the stuff out. Let's go ahead and talk to the next thing on the list here. Alright, then we've got the ginseng tricks. So, ginseng is basically like the old food items that you would have to farm out in the PSP version. Basically, like, you know how MP items were a bit of a pain to get a hold of in Reborn? You know how meat items were a bit of a pain to get a hold of in PSP? Well, instead of doing either of those, you have a standalone use of that TP boosting mechanic, meaning, for example, if you had, let's say, somebody like your White Knights, and you wanted to make use of their velocity shift ability, which is renamed Time of Need and actually also heals in this version, what you can do is, let's say, pop a ginseng and go and activate that ability wherever you'd like it. Or let's say you wanted to have a cleric start off with a blessing right before even getting anything started. You want to have your Slayer skills available right away. Instead of having to burn a meat item, or instead of having to burn an MP item, or any other kind of consumables that you really don't want to necessarily spend on any random encounter, instead you have Ginseng, which allows for a lot of interesting tricks, because there's a ton of new action skills in the game, which means that there's a lot of play when it comes to like Ginseng plus whatever skill there. So gives you a ton of play there. In fact, actually, one thing that I don't have on the list, but Terenites were one of those things that got reworked, in that they can actually dump out like 4 or 5 debuffs with a single action. So here, let's see if he actually has those skills on him. Does he? He doesn't. Why do you not have your Lament of the Dead, sir? Yeah, Lament of the Dead throws out like Weaken and Curse, and then you can take a debuff type weapon, as well as their Fearful Impact, and then just kind of like have them walk into a crowd, get ready for their kind of AoE spam there. It's like you pop a Ginseng, use their Lament, and then just have their Fearful Impact set up. And you can just basically get four of those debuffs off at the same time. Also, I should probably mention healing properly scales with Mind, as you saw right there, that she's still using basic heals. Actually, heals only go up to a maximum of rank 3 in this version. There is no heal 4. All heal is the same as major heal, but Mind, as well as Healcraft, as well as a few other bits and bobs here and there, will actually affect your healing, meaning that, let's say you use the Consecrate ability on a Cleric. This not only prevents Undead from rising, but also gives you Healcraft, which scales up your healing. You then use a Mother's Blessing on top of this, and functionally speaking, your Heal 1 has gone and more or less become 8 times as strong as the standard heal. It's really, really fun to mess around with this stuff. Actually, speaking of heals, it's also worth mentioning that all of those units that previously had a basic heal before have usually had their ability shifted to something else. You don't have a heavyweight unit that uses the basic heal skill until you get the Angel Knight in Chapter 4. And yes, I did say Chapter 4. You can actually get it earlier than you could before. But for example, every one of them will have some variation that's equal to or better than they used to be before. So like your basic Knight can use the Aegis ability that allows you to give somebody regeneration plus fortify. You have your Fencers, which have their item specialization. You have your White Knights with their Time of Need ability, basically boosting speed and healing at the same time. So there's a lot of kind of just fun, very personal type of improved healing as far as all of those go. Anyways, let's move on to the next one, and that's actually going to be the wind bosses. So you know the old the wind god weapons. As in, there was basically no way to possibly know where in the actual buffoonery you're meant to get those Wind God weapons or what they're even for. Right, so what we have over here in One Vision is that all of them are actually going to be associated with the bosses. So, for example, all the major bosses down in Palace of the Dead will be carrying one of them as well as an orb. They are made completely unique, which I guess technically they were in PSP as well. But anyways, they're going to be unique weapons that they will impossibly use one-handed, which is just to be like it's just kind of a flex basically. But since all the Wind God weapons are attached to a boss, and most of those bosses will be fought before you have a chance to reach Blackmoor, this means you can actually get to Blackmoor naturally without having to go and get a dang guide. So yeah, it's just a way cooler way to see those get used. Additionally, because of their additional features, those fights can be a little bit more interesting due to the extra functions of those weapons. So that's always fun. All right, next we've got double moves. So there's a lot of different abilities that will affect your movement type. I already mentioned one of them earlier. For example, in Blaze, the lava walking ability over on your shamans, right? So they would be able to extend their movement range by 3 and also walk on lava. Or you've got ninjas with the Wild Hunt ability that allow them to essentially take a double move there. Or in other cases, let's say use an ability like Opportunist to temporarily give yourself siege so that you can rush through a rampart aura without actually using the siege ability. So either way, nobody ever used siege in any version of these games. It's just kind of cool to see that that there's actually a reason to use it there. Okay, next we've got the crossbow categories. So there's a lot of them. Basically, all the folks that wished that they could use those crossbows in FFT, like wish that they didn't suck, welcome to your favorite version. So you've got a lot of different variations of the crossbows. Just like FFT, they're all going to be one-handed. Now, this means that they're always going to be useful with a shield, but you've got things like your basic crossbows, which are good for penetration, and generally have pretty good power. You've got stuff like your mind crossbows, which are also going to inflict poison. So these are going to be good for improving the mental stats of, let's say, debuff casters, along with being able to hit them with a poison effect. And so let's say you could use something like the new bullseye ability over on a rogue to kind of tag team in the ability to guarantee that poison on their crossbow. So you have this necromancer running around using this crossbow for improving their mental stats for casting, but they're also potentially throwing out a decent amount of extra damage off of poison and such. Additionally, one thing that I haven't mentioned yet, and I'm going to go ahead and just kind of show off right here, is actually the recovery system. So you'll notice that that fairy over there is about to bleed out, and I don't want that to happen. So, seeing as Azelston has plenty of experience already, we're actually going to go ahead and use him to get this unit back. Now, this is a feature that originally would end up scaring people off of trying this mod, because it basically means that if you lose a piece, that you actually will end up needing to sacrifice somebody in order to get them back on their feet. So you're basically evacuating one unit in order to give their life juices to somebody else. Now, this consolidation, though, this consolidation is so satisfying, because it means that the previously utterly overpowered recruitment abilities now have a more practical purpose as basically going and convincing the enemies to do that for you instead. Where recruit abilities in general have a lot more play, where, like, let's say, before you couldn't use recruit on your own people. They actually originally gave it infinite range so that you could practice recruiting by yelling at somebody for a 0% chance across the map. Now that is dumb and annoying, so instead you can actually use the far cheaper recruit to, let's say, train it up by talking to units nearby you. Additionally, it goes up something like 16 times faster than it used to before, and additionally, depending on the unit that's using it, you can potentially tag in your racial skills in order to even get guaranteed recruit odds on certain things under certain circumstances. So the recruit in general is just so much more useful than it is in the official versions here. And it just feels endlessly satisfying to be like, okay, you knock that dude out, and just like the SNES version, you go and corner them, recruit them to your side, and then force them to sacrifice themselves to get that unit back up. It just feels like such a good slap upside the head timeout moment for the AI. I love it. Anyway, Next, we've got the Death March ability. So this is actually a weird quirk of the PSP system, in which you actually can salvage skills off of other units. Now, a good part, bad part about all this. So, back in the PSP version, this was kind of annoying, because it meant that there were certain skills that you would want to salvage off of people, namely weapon skills as well as other rankable skills. And unfortunately, in most cases, those rankable skills were below slot 4. Now, this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but this basically meant that if they were below that 4th slot, well, tough luck. They're going to forget everything below this, for the most part. Now, on higher level versions of a lot of fights, there's going to be units that will specifically carry those rankable skills up towards the top of their list so that you can actually get a hold of them if you recruit those units. But additionally, you have an item called the Death March, which you can go craft after about Chapter 2, that will further allow you to actually cause that unit to more or less self-delete, that they will... If you recruit them and they use that item, they will join your party with all of their lives gone and the ability to salvage their skills immediately onto somebody else. So you don't have that awkward killing them off to steal their skills kind of phase. Okay. Next, the spear categories. Also, I love that we're barely anywhere through this list, and I'm already almost out of time. So, spear categories, there's a lot of them. Again, you've got your light spears for using in one hand, you've got your grappling spears for improving mental stats and also hobbling somebody's movement. These are typically going to be just an entire line of tridents, basically. You've got halberds that are going to be two-handed and switch out for higher slash damage. You've got long-range pikes that are going to be your old 2 to 3 tile variants, and all of these different versions, again, have further little subcategories on top of them once they get into the elemental versions. Long story short, there's a lot of spears. Do we count throwing spears into this? I don't know, but there's a lot of those as well. We already covered geomancers, dual buffs. So yeah, there's a lot of buffs and debuffs that will do multiple things at once. For example, Wormhole over here, instead of simply inflicting leaden on somebody, will leaden somebody as well as recover, as well as damage them for a percentage of their health, as well as also delaying their recovery time. So buffs and debuffs in general got combined in order to make sure that they were just more potent when the AI was using them, and generally had more play when you were using them. Again, these have been tested by the community for a good number of years now, so they're pretty darn good. Okay. Speed round, I suppose. So early Draconics. You got Draconics a lot earlier. They no longer require any consumables to use, and more classes are able to use them. Immersive movement buffs. We partially covered this earlier, but there's a lot of different buffs that allow you to move around the field a good bit easier, including things like Dracoons having the ability to ignore elevation for 1 tile. You've got unique flight abilities, as well as the Dragon Slayer thing that we mentioned earlier. So warp items, flight items, stuff like that is going to be unique. So you don't have that thing where you're suddenly going and trying to grind it up for the entire party. It's going to be one unique item, you'll always end up getting it, and what you do with it is up to you. This just kind of frees you up to still continue using other options, like let's say using Dragoons to ignore elevation. Even stuff like, for example, the unique class that Aerosel actually has access to that ability, which means that she can actually zap herself up to the top of a mountain and shoot down from it, which is pretty darn cool. Also, she only gets access to that class if she gets revenge on Leonard or something along those lines, which is pretty darn nifty. Anyway, let's see. Archer trick arrows, we covered those. Unique weapons and the rocket pike. So yeah, there's just a lot of unique weapon types, from the Crusaegrim from Symphony of the Night to a dang rocket pike, to what the hell is that one thing called? You got that a whole line of swords from what the hell is it? Path of Exile, I think it was, as well as just a bunch of different unique ranged weapons. All of the old unique weapons have been reworked into something that generally makes a bit more sense. Long story short, across the board, it's just rule of cool made practical is the best way to describe it. So like the Megiddo is basically the Soul Edge for all intents and purposes, giving you the Gremlin's Vampiric Kiss ability to go and steal health from something while being a big old chunkin' heavy to swing heavy sword, or let's say stuff like the Zephyros giving you access to Vortex Cut, which is basically like the second tier Draconics, allowing you to have like a sort of armor-piercing AoE kind of spell type thing. Which, speaking of Draconics, basic elemental spells have a harder time penetrating past armor. Draconics are designed to penetrate past armor, so they kind of have more of this armor-piercing potential to them. We've got stuff like the SNES spells coming back, so like Agony, which is an old ghost ability. That's just a Draconic ability that you get like in Chapter 2 now. Revival through Necromancy. You can get Necromancers in Chapter 1. You can use those as a way to revive people without sacrificing another unit, temporarily turning them into a zombie. And yes, you can craft your own Charms of Remission, meaning that Necromancy is an acceptable form of revival in this version, giving it a actually useful function for once. You've got fun steel tables where they've got a lot of fun kind of character building things in their pockets. I generally get a bit more backstory on various characters, like a lot of politicians will be carrying war bonds in their pockets. You've got new unique weapon classes. We covered most of those, but for example, let's say heavyweight hammers will be good for knocking targets back. You've got modified hammers that will be able to do additional, like blessed hammers that'll do additional damage versus undead, like paladin type hammers. Meanwhile, you've got other ones that will inflict stun on hit, all of that kind of stuff. RT delay weapons, which are unique to this version as well. So, for example, certain weapon types, like the bearded axes and stuff like that, can be used to inflict a slowdown on somebody. So, for example, that's what I'm running on Canopus at the moment, with his axe over here having an RT delay. So he essentially runs up, he counters something, and it makes them act a little bit slower. On top of his lightweight equipment, this means that he's usually able to zip around and just kind of outspeed everything around him, even if he's not much of a physical threat directly. Here, let's go ahead and probably just get into another fight here, just to keep showing this stuff off, because I continue to be running out of time here. Here, let's go ahead and replace you with, let's say, Canopus, or maybe a Dragoon. Yeah, we'll throw Kane in here, sure. Maybe replace you with Canopus here, just so we can show off some of these things. There we go. Okay, next up, Consolidated Golems. So all the golem categories have just been made into golems. Now, the original purpose of those golems seemed to be to have specific roles designed for them, like you'd assume better resistance on the Balder golems and stuff like that. Yeah, it didn't really work that way, unfortunately. They never really were different enough to fully justify them being 4 separate classes. But what we see in One Vision is that they've consolidated them all into just the Golem, and that Golem has separate cores that can be used as skills. So in their skills, you've got Hardcore, Anima Core, what are the other cores? I think like Power Core, and some other core, I'm just blanking. Point is, they've got different modes that you can basically put them into. So like a hardcore golem, Void Core, that was the last one. So like Void Core would be able to have really high resistance. Hardcore would have really good physical resistance. Power Core would be able to hit really hard with their physical attacks. Anima Core would be very accurate with their physical attacks, and they can only pick one. So this just kind of gives you your own little custom robot to play around with, which is cool. It's a fun little goober to play around with, and makes a lot more sense than suddenly, hey, this golem changed color, and now he's back to level 1. Alright, speed builds. Basically, as you saw with Canopus, speed builds are an actually available thing. Also, what I was mentioning earlier about speed casting. Did I remember to mention speed casting? I don't know. In case I didn't remember speed casting, basic casts of basic abilities, like basic buffs, basic missiles, basic heals, stuff like that, will be available to your casters on turn 1, which is really useful for ambush maps. So this means that they can oftentimes get themselves set up before anything really else gets going. Additionally, if you like the weakness system in Reborn, hitting an element, or hitting a unit will make them incredibly weak versus the opposing element. So for example, hit them with water, and they will take additional damage from lightning. Okay, next up, breakout skills. I partially mentioned Opportunist before, but there's a lot of abilities that allow you to just kind of break out of particularly sticky situations that just feel really good to use. And your skill list, due to not having an incredible amount of passives everywhere, is free enough that you can usually use most of these without suffering much for it. You've got accuracy skills, like the previously mentioned Trajectory. You've got Bullseye, Faded Circle over on Valkyries, which guarantees physical hits, just basically a quick little buff that they can cast in front of them as an action move. You've got stuff from FFT coming full circle, things like Throwing Stones being a nice and available thing on basic soldiers, like, basically like Squires and such. You've got the Geomancer abilities, the jump abilities, kind of sorta on your Dragoons, the FFT crossbows, basically. Things like... what the hell was it? The Dark Knight definitely more closely resembles the old kind of Dark Knight from there. The old spell abilities over on the Paladin, like the new finishers that they get, are basically reminiscent of all of your different Holy Knight variants and Dark Knight variants over from FFT. So you've got a ton of really cool stuff showing up there. Okay, we've got sub-drop mini-bosses. I already talked about that before. Basically, if you've got unique equipment, those units will be using it, just like it's Knight of Lotus. Default move is higher, so you have one higher movement and jump by default. In Reborn, they handle this by adding that movement buff to your crafted armor as of Chapter 2. In this case, just everybody gets it innately. You don't have to worry about that since all of your crafting equipment is side grades rather than upgrades. TP sapping finishers, we already covered that. Lancet, so this is one of many examples of unique abilities that are exclusive to this version. So like the Lancet ability over on the Dark Tree allows you to sacrifice your health to go heal somebody else, on top of then giving you a rebate on the amount that you healed. This means that they're eventually doing a positive, but they have to sort of like do a deposit of health up front. It's weird, but it works. It's one of those things you got to see to see it when it happens. Better infusions. Reborn took out the infusion abilities. One Vision ends up improving them so that you take additional kind of percentage-based healing, so they don't end up dropping off. Fast burbs. So the cockatrices and griffins are fast as fuck. Anyway, we've got logical item training. Basically, when it comes to training, your basic like band-aids and stuff like that, any old dumbass is able to use them just fine. You don't have to get specifically Field Alchemy 1 or 2 to understand how to drink a bottle, okay? Your people are not brain dead. So they are able to use those things effectively. Oh, my dang nose. Okay, so yeah, as far as item goes, basically, you've got item specialists like your warlocks and your clerics. They're the ones that are going to be able to use the full complement of items. Old builds that worked in PSP will still work here. Like if you wanted to use your old lobber cleric, that still works out just fine. But they're going to have a lot better options. Like their basic heal will almost always be available, but you can also potentially tag them in with, let's say, a unit to charge them up or whatever else. I didn't even mention Disembowel, by the way. So a lot of the old kind of dragon abilities, like your tail whips and stuff like that, could be avoided by evasion builds before. Now every kind of heavyweight type of dragon build, like the ultra heavies, will have this Disembowel skill, which is functionally speaking a combination of damage and accuracy scaling finisher, meaning that if they get their full TP bar, something's gonna die. So there's kind of a countdown on dragons that they're way scarier than they used to be before. Their breath moves are all upgraded to be variations of just like the best of Knight of Lotus, the best of Ogre Battle 64. All of the time, all the best breath moves from the series are available on your dragons, but Disembowel, if you let them get charged up, if they survive your Slayer attacks, goodbye. Somebody is getting deleted because it will not miss and it will not have mercy. Anyways, moving on. What else? Non-crashing generics. If you want to use unique characters or unique skills or whatever else, you want to cheat those in. Not only does the official site for the thing give you the codes to do so, but also this no longer crashes the game, which it does in the official versions. Let's see, full buff and debuff item rebalance. Basically, all of them just do a lot better than they ever used to before. And this includes, for example, this includes Reborn in that particular respect, because all of them still have a purpose. So, like, still, things like Fall Strike or whatever else are still good in Reborn, but in this particular case, things like Stagger actually matter. Things like False Flight actually matter. Like, it's a situation where, just like Reborn, they removed the passives, like the passive stacking, because the 5-stack passive stacking that you could do in the PSP version rendered most buffs and debuffs completely useless, because if somebody had the countering thing to it, it didn't matter that you were using the buff or debuff. They already ended up blowing way past that point anyway, so they were usually way past the point of being affected by stuff. So in this particular case, because it's just the one stack that's available from any given point, it matters quite a bit more, and additionally, they are a lot more potent than they were before. Also, for things like traps, the traps have been changed quite a bit to the point that they do percentage-based damage. They have a variety of interesting effects, from things like giving you Ivory Tower, from things like giving you speed buffs, or full heals, or MP charges, or TP charges, or just shackling, charming, whatever else. There's a ton of new effects added to traps, and if you wanted to create your own, essentially just have your own cards, because you didn't get the cards that you wanted, you actually have wild cards that drop regularly, allowing you to customize your card loadouts, also if you wanted to use them for their buffs and debuffs. So Forgery is a thing that exists, allowing you to craft class marks that you otherwise potentially might have missed. So if you wanted to, let's say, have access to Lord and you're on the Princess route, you can just go forge your own Lord mark. You know what? Who's going to do anything about it? The law that's currently on your team? Yeah, I didn't think so. We've got the easiest Denem recruitment, full stop, with only requiring one dragon, just like Reborn, but additionally, you'll see glass pumpkins dropping regularly throughout the story, meaning that you oftentimes will have more than enough glass pumpkins by the time you get to Deneb, meaning that you might naturally run into that cutscene with her getting recruited. Additionally, orbs are actually just a crafting material in this one because most of their effects have been reworked to other more sensible locations, so rather than using orbs as a bit of a nuke, they are strictly a crafting material, so you more than likely would not have accidentally burned through all of them or whatever else. Chapter 4 Angel, as a reference to the SNES version, Brent and Morn will actually drop a class mark for the Angel Knight, which you'll notice is a class mark, not an item that you have to transform into, because the PSP version's transformation into the Angel Knight was absolutely obnoxious, beyond obnoxious. Like, it's just like the kinds of thing that makes you like shake with rage over why exactly they would design it this way. So no, you just instantly change into one. You can get a Chapter 1 Necromancer mark by stealing it off of Nibeth. You can also get a Rogue mark from the river map there. You can also still get to the swamp to get your Terranite mark. So you have a lot of classes available in Chapter 1. Like Farampa ends up giving you Fusiliers potentially in like I think like the end of Chapter 2. Habrim can go full Jedi. We already talked about his unique class earlier, but they can do things like project out sword cuts and add their MP bar to their attacks. Otherwise, they're a mix of ninja and swordmaster with the same limitation of using only a particular type of sword, just like they did in PSP, which is kind of cool. It's a nice little kind of multi-directional nod there, which I personally really enjoy. And in fact, most unique characters got unique classes, like Oshone with her Dragonborn, Lindel with his Commando, Gamp with his Headhunter. You've got a lot of cool, very flavorful type of builds, and if you are using the low-level Class EXP scaling fix, usually they're only a few fights away from actually getting leveled up to scratch, since this does still use the old PSP leveling system, but this does give you time to kind of experiment around with their builds a little bit and understand what made them good in the first place. Additionally, every one of their classes will typically come with the important skills that you'd want on them already trained up, so, you know, that's just a bit of a thing. Arrow speed. You'll notice that the arrows fire faster than any other version. This is no accident. The arrow speed in PSP, or if you forgot to turn on the fast forward in Reborn, was obnoxious. Let's see, River Rogue, already mentioned that. FFT, Night of Lotus, Snez, Dragoon, already mentioned that. FFTA, Cursed Weapons. So yeah, all of the totem abilities from FFTA basically got turned into the default Cursed Weapon variants of every weapon type, whereas the actual Snapdragon weapons are the Soul Reaver and the Astral Cord that are rewards for finishing some of the high-end dungeons and stuff like that. So I believe Soul Reaver is available in Palace of the Dead, and I think the Astral Cord is available from completing San Bronza. So that gives you the old Snapdragon effect, but it's now limited to a spear or sword. Seeing as nobody really used them for any other purposes anyway, and generally speaking, the standard cursed weapons that use those, FFTA Demon Souls, basically, are going to have a unique effect in that they actually do damage, not only from their weapon damage, but also will do a percentage of the health bar, meaning that they are especially potent against high armor enemies. We've got improved crafting, obviously, so not only is it guaranteed, unlike the PSP version, but also the requirements almost create a sort of mini-game of sorts, where a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily normally think about end up kind of rearing their heads. It manages to get that sort of good meditative part of what we saw back in PSP. Like, it manages to get the good part of that without the annoying stuff. Okay, next, actually related to this, is what I like to call the Apocrypha launch button. So with the Apocrypha in One Vision, they're exceptionally good, but just to make sure that you don't accidentally burn through those spells on accident, because, you know, you're looking through your spell list and you're like, what does this button do? And then you give your Apocrypha to your Dragoon and you're like, oh, well, I guess, damn, screw me then. Instead, what you have is that when you would normally get the Apocrypha, you get what's known as the, I think it was like the Primal Core or whatever it is. It's basically a glowy gem thing that you craft into the Apocrypha spells themselves, and this is just basically like you don't accidentally burn through your spell scrolls. You specifically have to go and craft them. You will have that crafting book by then. Additionally, it's worth noting that the elemental areas in general are obviously the seat of power for those elements. You get the highest tier versions of all the basic spells out of there, as well as the Apocrypha, as well as if you go through all the elemental temples, you will get all of your basic elemental craftable gear. Additionally, unlike PSP, you don't have to require random drops in order to make use of that gear, allowing you to craft it right as you were. So, for example, if you were crafting your elemental gear, by the time you completed the elemental temples, you would essentially use dragon, like you would, let's say, take dragons, you would sell those dragons in order to get access to the orbs that you use then to craft the gear for the elemental temples, which means that over the course of getting that elemental gear from those temples, you would probably end up unlocking Deneb just by sheer circumstance. It's a beautiful bit of design that I'm probably explaining poorly, but hopefully that explains it a little bit. Next up, we got teleporting ghosts and liches. They just teleport by default. The octopus. There's no Aquaveil, so Aquaveil got taken away, but this meant that they have whip hands, which they don't do in the official versions, giving them 2 tiles of range, the ability to attack diagonally, and their abilities are terrifying. So basically, Knight of Lotus status. That is to say, first playthrough Knight of Lotus status. For sure, Cyclopes can wear hats. I don't care if that's not necessarily something you care about. You should. Let's see. Umbra's got a lot of love. We already mentioned that earlier. Unique Dragon Scale, already mentioned that. The Adamant tier. Okay, so if you like basic equipment, you like the basic gear, you don't want to use the unique elemental stuff or whatever else, there's an extra tier added in the kind of later / post game that allows you to still use standard gear and just get a very specific upgrade towards it. It's pretty difficult to get the materials for that stuff, but it does give you a really, really good amount of hardiness to those units. Fusils feel like Fusils because they have a really high crit rate, which means that it always feels chaotic to shoot guns in this thing, which means that they explode and make big booms a lot of the time, which is a lot of fun. You've got the loot economy, so loot items. If you're wondering what you can sell, you have an entire separate subcategory of just fun items that you found. Unlucky swords, dual-wieldable, kind of dual-wield custom weapons will have negative crit modifier, or negative luck rates in order to make it so that you are less likely to knock them backwards with the first hit. In Reborn, they did a different version of this where the first hit would hold them in place. From what I understand, that was not mechanically possible here, so instead, they are given a negative luck modifier, which actually has a lot of weird, interesting effects in this one. Ninja buffs are consistent but not annoying, so things like Decoy, as I mentioned in a different video that might be going up next to this one about the post-game, ninjas in the original PSP version would constantly spam Decoy like it's going out of style, an ability that you couldn't even get yourself until you got to Deneb's shop, which felt really incongruous. Anyways, long story short, they don't spam it all the time, but also it's something that you can get at the same time, and it's something that is generally not as annoying as it was in other versions. Undead hammers, we already covered those. Spawn talent types, units will essentially have categories that they fall into, making them more specifically good at certain things, which means that it gives you more of a kind of obvious template to work around with, though you do still have the old random stats from before as well. Let's see, training a recruit, you can actually talk to your friends in order to train your recruit skills, which is kind of cute. Unranked ranks, things like Lament of the Dead, no longer have a rank associated, so it's not tied to level like it was in Reborn, it's not tied to using it a bajillion times like it was back in PSP. Instead, it is just Lament of the Dead. It is 60%, just that's all you need. You're good. It's 60%. It's already fantastic. Don't touch it anymore. Also, Lament of the Dead curses and weakens now, which is pretty awesome. Speed consistency, all equipment will remain consistent with its speed. Classic Snapdragons, we covered that. Quick casts, I believe we covered that. Okay, so that is the list of the first like 100 or so things here. If y'all want to see more, we can just sort of like keep this thing going. But speaking of going, I gotta get going. So y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care. Thank you for stopping by, and yeah, take care.